Welcome everybody. It's like the best part of my week. You really are. It's like an army of humble awesomeness. It's a incredible community. I hope if you are new, you will connect with people because it truly is a phenomenal. Just if you knew like the human beings, and I know so many people here, so I'm just so grateful you're here. So anyway, let's get going. First of all, my son is home from college, and he really wanted to learn how to work out and spend time in the gym. I used to spend time in the gym. I do my whole home thing now, but I'm back in the gym because my son, I'm like, how cool would that be if we could spend, our summer together in between working and do that? And so I was talking to him this morning, and he's on the bench press, and I was talking to him about, about the necessity for failure. So some of you that have spent time around weights know that that's like there's a necessity for failure in order to build muscle mass. And my son he's building muscle mass, trust me. And so it's fun, but I was talking to him about not just the necessity for failure, but the necessity. What I mean by that is at some point pushing enough weight that you actually can't do it, but actually failing well. And one of the things that I was noticing when he was on the bench press, you know how it is where you're more focused on actually finishing than you are on finishing well. So he was kind of like squirrely on the bench. He's like throwing the bar around. I'm kind of getting nervous. And I was talking to him about maintaining a good posture as you're doing that. And I think it's one of the things that it's so, I mean, there's an amazing, of course, this metaphor has all kinds of application to what learning and development is about, the necessity for failure, but also what it means to fail well. And in terms of the stretch, and that it does hurt. I mean, we were at the gym this morning, and being back in the gym has been kind of painful for me. But at the same time, it's been kind of awesome to be with him. So it's for another day. But I think one of the things I think is powerful about this is our possibility of being together and supporting one another, because it also, when you do fail lifting weights, you need a spotter. And so it's amazing that some of the people who have connected together here who have become spotters for one another. So the conversation today, and those of you that are new, it's just like I just try to stir the pot, and it's just with a little bit of industrial organizational psychology, but also just with some of these topics that are hot and relevant today. And so the topic today is hybrid world, hybrid leaders, and my framing question, and then I'm going to get into some content leading up to this, is what would change if you viewed every leader around you as a hybrid leader? And I'll talk to you more about what I mean by that, but what would change if you viewed every leader around you as a hybrid leader? So our world is full of hybrids. And when we think about hybrids, one of my I like my bottom shelf way of describing it for Rob's 8-year-old self is we're talking about something that is a little bit of this and a little bit of that. A hybrid being something that's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And but the actual definition, I love this stuff, is this: a hybrid is the offspring of two plants or animals of different species or varieties, such as, some of you may know this and some of you don't, a mule. Did you know that a mule is a hybrid of a donkey and a horse? Okay, so that's a hybrid. Or a zedonk, which is half zebra, half donkey. Or for those of you who are much more educated, there is, of course, the liger, which is half tiger, half lion. Come on, give me a shout out to Napoleon Dynamite, right? So some of you know exactly what I'm talking about, right, Corey? Okay, you've seen it. You know what a liger is. The point is this, is that a hybrid is made up of combining two different things. Could it be three? Sure, I think it probably could. And it could probably be more than that, but it's combining distinct things to create this new thing. So here are some characteristics of hybrids. It is, as I've said, created from the combination or blend of two different definable things. All right, it's created from that blend. The new thing has its own identity, and identity it receives from the two things that are combined to make it, and it likely has characteristics on different levels of the two things. I mean, you can't help but when I look at my children, I'm just like, okay, I can see little pieces of, of my wife and me and them and some of that going on. So that's one thing. Another thing is this: neither of the first two things the hybrid was created from are good or bad per se. but they may present both strengths and challenges on their own and in combination. The combination of those things is very interesting. Here's another characteristic, number 4. Sometimes it's difficult for others to understand or communicate at first. So sometimes it's difficult to understand what a hybrid is when it first exists until it exists. In other words, it may not make sense for many of us. Some of you are starting to path into what my other points will be. Number 5, the hybrid eventually becomes a thoroughbred. Okay, so I went to high school in Kentucky. So there's a lot of country in this guy also. But I was surrounded by where I was in Kentucky. If you live in Kentucky, it's like you're surrounded by tobacco farms and thoroughbreds. Like there are horse farms everywhere. It's one of the most beautiful places if you ever have a chance to visit. But here's the definition of a thoroughbred. A thoroughbred, as it's known today, so think about a thoroughbred horse. You'll never watch the Kentucky Derby the same after this, by the way. Okay, it was developed in the 17th and 18th century England when native mares in England were crossbred with imported Oriental stallions of typically Arabian, Barb, or Turkoman breeding. And so it's interesting because all modern thoroughbreds can trace their pedigrees to 3 stallions. This is fascinating. Originally imported into England in the 17th and 18th centuries, and to a larger number of foundational mares of mostly English breeding. As an example, now here's what's kind of interesting about this. Okay, when you think about that's what created a thoroughbred, is that the time will come when a Labradoodle will no longer be known as a hybrid. And it's almost like that now, right? Some of you thinking right now, but it will eventually receive AKC status as its own breed. You know, it'll still be a Labradoodle, but something will change in the way that the things we assume about it, as all breeds were at some time. I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but we were making jokes as the WiLD team before this started that all dogs came from some version of a wolf, right? Originally, and then we start to breed and create different kinds of animals. So here's another thing. Number 6, hybrid breeds can cause controversy. Like, for example, don't hate on me for this just because I'm saying this, because I don't mean this is controversial, but like when the Prius came out, all right, when the Priuses first came out, for some people, there was a controversy in that. Like, what is that thing, that car? And now, like, probably half of you have one. I don't know. But what's also interesting about hybrids is that they open up possibilities for others. I don't know if this is, this is oversimplified, but think about the Prius as a hybrid opening up the possibility for Tesla. Kind of interesting, right? Or another example of this is Megan. We had a conversation the other day as a team. Some of you know Silas. And raise your hand if you know who Silas is. All right, some of you know Silas. Silas is Megan's son, and Silas comes to our WiLD meetings. How old is Silas now, Megan?
He's 18 months.
Okay. So what's been interesting for us is like, and Claire actually said this at one of our meetings where we were talking about our own development. Claire said it's been amazing having Silas as a part of our meetings because it quite literally is motherhood on display. And what was interesting was, is that in some ways it's a hybrid, right? We're putting together 2 parts of Megan's identity and her role into one space, and eventually, maybe, and there's different ways that this looks, that becomes a thoroughbred kind of experience. So, man, there's so much to unpack in this. So in terms of our hybrid world, most often what we're talking about right now, and I get this, is that we're talking about this integration of our face-to-face first way of thinking versus our discovered like virtual way of thinking. Like people are talking about this right now as what's it going to look like? What's next? Because I'm near like a lot of Google complexes and they're sitting empty right now. They're building tons of buildings right now. And I'm like, what's it going to look like? Are those buildings going to be full of people? Google may not care because there's so much cash running through that place. I don't know, but I'm not hating on Google. But anyway, it's right down the street. So here are some things that are interesting. I was fascinated by a book. If any of you read this, a book called Blown to Bits, published a few years back, where it was talking about the value propositions in a lot of industries being blown to bits or blown apart, because in the past we had to make a sacrifice in one place or another between what the author described as richness and reach. In other words, you had to decide, are you going to have a rich message meet or reach a few people, or a less rich message reach a lot of people? What's fascinating today with that, so it was like a 2x2, you can imagine you had to pick, but certain industries were destroyed or their value proposition was completely changed. Like, for example, the newspaper industry with the onset of technology. And today that whole 2x2 doesn't even make sense, because now, like, it's, if the author of that book could have seen where we were going to go with customization of a rich message to an individual en masse, it's kind of unbelievable. But I think what's interesting is that there probably is a new 2x2 today. I don't want to get into this thing just for the sake of time, but I think my new 2x2 would be related to time and connection with people instead of richness and reach, that might be happening at the integration of what's happening with our face-to-face world versus our virtual kind of world. And anybody that's beaten up on virtual, by the way, I know we're tired of it. I will tell you that what we have learned at the WiLD Leaders team is that well-architected virtual spaces can actually do some things better than face-to-face kind of venues with large groups of people. It's one of the reasons that I know so many of you so well, that opportunity came up that I would not have had. Like, there's a lot of you that I actually know quite well, and some of you I know that I wouldn't have even known had this not been possible. So that's an but I want to, let me keep pushing forward. Here's one thing that's interesting to think about. We were already working hybrid before. We've been through this before. My brother was kind of a high-tech nerd when he was doing leader development back with Microsoft. And I remember when he bought his first Macintosh. Some of you know what I'm talking about, the box, right? And he's working with Microsoft. Microsoft had an internal email system. And if you were doing work as a contractor, or consultant, or internally at Microsoft in the 80s, you had to be on email, but email was not outside of the place. And so that whole concept of this whole world of face-to-face, like coming in face-to-face with technology, was already happening. I mean, think about texting. Some of you guys know exactly what I'm talking about, where the first time you thought about texting, you're like, why would someone write down stuff instead of call somebody? Now we all know why we do that. So we were already hybrid. My kids will say, if I ask them, I'll go like, hey, did you talk to so-and-so today? They're like, oh yeah, talk to him. They don't mean they actually talked to him, right? They don't mean that. They mean they DM'd them somewhere, right? They on some technology. So it's kind of interesting. We were already working in this world. But here's where I want to bring this around, is that I think there's this interesting concept of what hybrid looks like in our world. And now I want to ask you this question, is what does hybrid have to do with whole leader development? And I think there's a lot of relevance to our hybrid world, to what it means for us as hybrid leaders, if you think about those definitions. So just after college, one of my good friends gave me a nickname, and that nickname was Bobby. All right. So some of you that are on here, I'm looking at you, Steve, and I know Doherty's here. There are people who know this. Steve won't call me Bobby because he's known me since I was born. Steve McCrath has, quite literally. But other friends of ours started to call me this. I hated it. I didn't want to be called that. When my wife and I met, she started calling me Bobby because all my friends called me that. So I'm like, that's not my name. But let me fast forward for just a second. There's a reason why I'm telling you that. Is that I was a part of, some of you know this, and I'm not sure if Kim's here today, but I've been a part of multiple longitudinal studies. I was doing all this work inside the aerospace industry, studying the developmental journey of leaders. And I was also, at the same time, I was getting just this amazing experience of being a part of that and seeing the developmental, like the whole developmental journey of these interconnected parts of a leader's development that were all playing a role individually and together. And at the same time, some of you know this too, I'm a midlife guy who still enjoys a good video game once in a while. So I was getting involved in online gaming platforms. And so as this was happening, I started dreaming about building a process like some of you experienced with the WiLD Toolkit's about. So as I was building this whole leader development system that was going to integrate these multiple things, think about that for a second, hybrid, right? I was like, what do I call it? So I realized, so I had named myself in my gaming world, my Xbox gamer tag is Bad Bobby. So I had taken this dumb nickname that my friends had given me. I thought, I'm going to make it mean. So I called myself Bad Bobby. So, but there was another story that was emerging. When I looked at the developmental journey of leaders that we had been studying and talking with over these years, I was seeing this story that was a part of my story as well, that they were a combination of different integrated parts that included roles they were playing, that included parts of their identity, that included their background, all these things. And so I was thinking about this and I was like, well, part of me, I am part, I'm part of many different things that have shaped the person that you all are experiencing today. But I'm also someone who appreciates a good video game. So I called the initial site and development of the WiLD Toolkit was called badbobby.com. And so Bad Bobby was born. And with that weird brand that my wife always said, that sounds kind of like it's dirty, like no one's going to use that. I felt a lot of conviction around that because I really felt like I wanted to make sure that it maintained this integrity that we are all, if you have trouble with this weird named website, you're going to have a lot more trouble when one of the people on this call actually shares the real integrated parts of their journey and their whole story. That was my conviction, but eventually I was convinced to change that. So I want to show you a couple of, I have a couple of other just kind of, so there's the original logo of badbobby.com. It was awesome. We had 10,000 people who use that process, even with the weird name. But here's just a couple of other things before we get out into groups, just for a little bit of fun. A friend of mine, I don't know if Greg is here, sent me a few pictures a few years back. You cannot believe when someone has pictures like this of your family. So he sent me this with this caption: Glad Bobby. I'm just giving you a moment to take a peek, see if you can recognize anybody. Mad Bobby, the captions he sent me. And then of course, there's Bad Bobby. So this, it's the funniest picture. If you could see my siblings today. I also love it that in the second picture where I'm mad, my parents are like looking at me like, hey, straighten up, son. So, and obviously I have all kinds of youngest and firstborn issues because I'm so much younger than the rest of those weirdos. So no, my family's amazing. So anyway, here's my point. Here's where we're coming full circle. We are all hybrids. We are all hybrids. Every leader that you know is a hybrid. Culturally, we are hybrids. My name is Robert Bruce McKenna. I couldn't be more Scotch Irish in terms of my name. I've got it in my bloodstream, but I'm actually more Finnish than I am Scotch Irish. So there's a part of me, that introverted part of me, I don't know if that's kind of a generalization and stereotype of Finnish people, but it's kind of funny. I've got a very large part of me is Scandinavian. Experientially, I've been shaped by multiple experiences across multiple roles that I've had, just like all of you. Genetically, like genetics do play a role, like in terms of personality, some of the interesting research around that. It's not everything, but it's a part. Some of those things that are more predictive in terms of the traits that I bring. Relationally, the people that I'm connected to, the context within which we lead is a part of our hybrid story. So developmentally, we're all hybrids. And if you know me, you know that like I spent my whole adult career building a process that helps us get specific and with intention. If you want to hang around for the conversation afterwards, I hope you will do that. For those of you that want some real-time coaching, the WiLD Toolkit, it's interesting, back to my gym metaphor. It's one thing for us to talk about ideas around working out. It's another thing to actually walk into a gym and have someone show us those different machines that'll work different muscles. And so if you want to hang around and see some of the structure for intention, I'd love to have you see that. But let me start with 5 questions I want to ask you to talk about. And I know some of you are going to go into this conversation going like, I just want to talk about hybrids. You know what I mean? I know that's true, which I think there's power in that. So go where you want to go. But here's my 5 questions in terms of your hybrid self that also I'd like us to think about, like, what does it mean to see this in other people? Question number 1 is this, and there are 5 C's: competence, calling, community, character, and context. And Claire will put those into the chat. Competence, calling, community, character, and context. These are all just pieces of each of our developmental story. And so here's my questions. Competence. What is your unique competence? Another way to think about that. What is the unique contribution you bring to every team or group that you're a part of? And every one of you has one. You have several, I would suggest. That's a part of your hybridness. The second thing, who are you called to serve? Specifically, who are you called to serve? The third question, what community is around you? And when I say community, I also mean the organization that might be around you. The next question, what unique character attributes do you bring? And I would include in that part, because I think of character as who you are, and I would also include personality. So some of you might want to talk about that. What unique character attributes do you bring? And then the last question, I have one more meta question, but the last big question is this: what context has shaped you? It's so fascinating experientially to think about this. Like in my own context, I was shaped by industrial organizational psychology, clinical psychology, theology, education. I can tell you so many things about, I'm the son of a university president, and I have all kinds of stories of beauty and brokenness that are a part of that as well. And so like all of us have some kind of context, and some of it we may not be ready to share. Like I'm not ready to share with you all of my context, but those are important facets of my hybridness. And here's the last thing. Can you imagine if we better saw, if we understood that same hybrid form in every person within our sphere of influence? Like what would change if we could see that in terms of the long term, our performance together, our functioning together, our forgiveness of one another, our understanding of one another? What would that look like? So go where you want to go. Love, this is the best part. Y'all go.